the US government just banned consumer routers made outside the US. So, this gives some context. In December, the Federal Communications Commission banned all future drones made in foreign countries from being imported into the United States unless or until their maker gets an exception. Now, the FCC has done the exact same for consumer networking gear, citing, quote, an unacceptable risk to the national security of the United States and to the safety and security of US persons. As The Verge points out, the vast majority, if not all, consumer routers are currently manufactured outside the United States, and the vast majority of future consumer routers are now banned. My biggest question is kind of like how they're differentiating between consumer routers and other routers. I've seen the FCC, their definition of residential routers, which basically says that it's all routers that are intended to be used in a residential setting and can be installed by the end user.
I wanted to point out that according to the article, well, according to the FCC as well, this is about national security, right? They specifically mentioned the Volt Typhoon, the Salt Typhoon, and the Flax Typhoon, which that one I'm not familiar with, which targeted critical American communications, energy, transportation, and water infrastructure. But the thing they don't mention, Salt Typhoon happened because of a law enforcement backdoor in our telecommunications infrastructure. And Volt Typhoon happened because American-made routers, Cisco and Netgear mostly, were just not kept up to date.
Kind of like all of the tariff stuff lately and the other trade bans that have been going on in the US, I think it's going to be a big challenge for American consumers right now. Manufacturing capacity for these routers certainly cannot shift to the US in at a moment's notice. I mean, it would take years for this to even be a possibility.
There's kind of a big price gap, isn't there, between a consumer level router and an enterprise one? Like, how big of a price gap are we talking?
Yeah, so that's where it really depends on the product. The entire system, it's always going to be more expensive because you have to buy the router and the access points separately. It's possible, especially with some products like either from Ubiquiti or MikroTik. I know that they make access points that are probably readily accessible, but I don't know if the FCC is going to extend that to pretty much anything that normal residential consumers will buy, or whether it'll just be like things that are marketed towards consumers. The worst case scenario, I think, for this whole thing from a privacy perspective is that the available options that will be left on the market, I think it's going to be much easier to track because the specific definition of like residential consumer routers that they're using here do say it's routers that are intended to be installed by the end user. So presumably something that your ISP installed would not be affected. So I think a lot of ISPs will be installing their own routers. And those are pretty well known to track a ton of information. It's one of the main reasons. There's a lot of reasons that people will replace their ISP provided router, but tracking and privacy concerns are certainly one of them. This could also, I think, get more people to switch to like cellular connections or use their cell phones more because you don't need a router at all. But of course, the whole cell network system is more problematic for surveillance and privacy as well compared to like these hardline internet connections. So
Are manufacturing and assembly the same thing in this context? Would that be a loophole? Maybe like, okay, just take all the components, ship them over here, and we'll spin up a factory in Houston or wherever, Indiana, and just assemble them here. And now it's not manufactured.
that is a great question. I don't know how they would apply this to like individual router components. If there are security concerns, like we could certainly look at all of the security concerns and issues that we've seen with routers. We've definitely reported on some or talked about them on this show before, various routers being attacked with malware or updates that you should install. But this kind of like blaming that on it being because they're foreign routers doesn't make a lot of sense to me. This is definitely a case of like because all routers are foreign, it's sort of a correlation situation, not a causation.